smoke was still rising over Kuwait City when the Pentagon confirmed what no one wanted to believe. 2 United States Air Force F-15 Strike Eagles, the most advanced fighter jets in the American arsenal, had been shot down, not by a peer military, not by Russia, not by China, but by a drone swarm launched from Iranian-backed positions inside Iraqi territory and Kuwait. Kuwait had seen it coming and said nothing. This is not a story about a single military incident. This is the story of how one calculated silence, one fatal diplomatic mistake, triggered a chain of events that is now threatening to pull the entire Middle East, the global economy, and possibly the world into a conflict unlike anything we have seen since World War II. Stay with me, because in the final 2 minutes of this video, I am going to show you exactly how close we are to the edge right now, and what happens if we go over it. Let us go back to where this really began, because if you only follow the headlines, you're missing the most important pieces of the puzzle. For months, the United States military had been operating out of Ali al-Salam Air Base in Kuwait, conducting joint operations in support of Israel's broader campaign to neutralize Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure. The American presence in Kuwait was not secret. It was visible. It was deliberate. And Iran had been watching every single runway, every refueling schedule, and every flight pattern with extraordinary precision. Intelligence sources later confirmed that Iranian assets, both human intelligence on the ground and satellite tracking capabilities provided by allied non-state actors, had been mapping U.S. air movements from Kuwait for over 6 weeks. 6 weeks of data, 6 weeks of identifying patterns, 6 weeks of building the perfect window. And American commanders, relying on Kuwait's air defense umbrella and the assumption that a Gulf Cooperation Council member state would never allow its territory to be used as a staging ground for Iranian retaliation, never adjusted their flight patterns. That assumption became a catastrophic vulnerability. On the morning of the strike, 2 F-15s took off from Ali al-Salam on what was classified as a routine patrol mission. Routine. The word itself now sounds almost tragic in hindsight. Within 11 minutes of takeoff, both aircraft were targeted by a coordinated salvo of Iranian-manufactured Shahed 136 loitering munitions, the same drone design that has repeatedly demonstrated its ability to overwhelm air defense systems by attacking in synchronized waves. The F-15s, designed to dominate in air-to-air combat against conventional enemy aircraft, were not equipped or positioned to respond effectively to a swarm attack coming from below and behind at low altitude. The pilots never had a meaningful window to react. 4 American service members were lost, and the world changed overnight. Now here is the question that every defense analyst, every intelligence official, and every government in the Gulf is now asking behind closed doors, and it is the question that Kuwait desperately does not want answered publicly. What did Kuwait know, and when did they know it? Multiple regional intelligence sources have pointed to communications intercepts suggesting that Kuwaiti authorities received signals intelligence warnings at least 72 hours before the attack, indicating elevated Iranian drone activity along the Iraq-Kuwait border corridor. The Kuwaiti government has not confirmed these reports, but they have also not denied them with any specific force. What they have done is issue a blanket statement condemning the attack, while simultaneously opening back-channel diplomatic communication with Tehran. Think about what that means. A NATO partner nation, hosting American forces on its soil, potentially sat on threat intelligence for 3 days, and then rushed to reassure the very country that killed 4 American soldiers the moment the smoke cleared. This is not just a military story. This is a geopolitical earthquake, and the aftershocks are still moving. Washington's response was swift and furious, but also critically constrained. The United States launched retaliatory strikes within 18 hours, targeting IRGC command nodes inside eastern Syria and 2 weapons depots in western Iraq that had been identified as drone staging areas. The strikes were precise. They were effective from a purely tactical standpoint, but they did not touch Iran directly. And that restraint, that deliberate decision not to cross the border into Iranian territory, was interpreted by Tehran not as wisdom, but as weakness. Iran's Supreme National Security Council convened an emergency session within hours of the American retaliation. Iran had drawn its own red line months earlier. Any American military response to IRGC-linked operations would trigger what Iranian commanders have been calling the Ring of Fire strategy. Not a single dramatic strike, not a direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy in open water. Instead, a coordinated, sustained pressure campaign against every single American military and economic interest across all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council states simultaneously. This is where the story becomes something that no news channel can fully capture in a 3-minute segment, because what Iran has now activated is not a war in the traditional sense. It is economic strangulation dressed in military clothes. Let us talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because this is the artery that keeps the modern world alive, and right now, Iran has its hand around it. Approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption. Every barrel of oil that flows from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, and Qatar to Asia, Europe, and the Americas, it all passes through a waterway that is, at its narrowest point, just 21 miles wide. 21 miles. Iran controls the northern coastline of that strait. And in the past 72 hours, the IRGC Naval Command has deployed a combination of anti-ship missile batteries, submarine assets, and naval mine-laying vessels to positions that effectively give Tehran veto power over every commercial vessel attempting transit. They have not formally closed the strait. That distinction matters enormously from a legal and diplomatic standpoint. What they have done instead is issue what they are calling safety advisories, essentially warning commercial shipping operators that Iranian naval forces cannot guarantee the security of vessels in the region during what they describe as active military operations. The result is identical to a closure. 87 oil tankers that were scheduled to transit the strait in the past 48 hours have diverted or anchored offshore. The insurance costs for Strait of Hormuz transits have increased by over 400% in 3 days, and the oil markets have responded exactly as you would expect. Brent crude has surged past $80 per barrel, a near 10% jump in under a week. Energy analysts at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have both issued emergency assessments warning that if Strait transits remain disrupted for more than 14 days, Brent crude could hit $120 per barrel, a price point that would trigger automatic recessionary pressure across every major economy on Earth. Europe, which was already managing a fragile post-inflation recovery, would face an immediate energy crisis. Asian manufacturing, which runs almost entirely on Gulf oil imports, would see production costs spike within weeks. And the United States, despite its domestic energy production capacity, would not be immune. Gasoline prices, jet fuel costs, heating oil, plastics, fertilizers, the entire input cost structure of the American economy is connected to global crude pricing. One waterway, 21 miles wide. And the global economy is holding its breath. But the Strait of Hormuz is not the only pressure point Iran is squeezing right now, not even close. While attention was focused on the Kuwait incident and the Strait, something equally significant was happening in Qatar. The Ras Laffan industrial city, which handles the vast majority of Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports, was targeted by a drone strike that damaged a secondary processing facility. Qatar Energy, which supplies LNG to 14 countries including Japan, South Korea, Pakistan, and several European nations, has temporarily suspended export operations, pending security assessments. Qatar supplies approximately 15% of global LNG trade. The timing of this strike, simultaneous with the Strait disruption, makes unmistakably clear that this is not improvised retaliation. This is a choreographed economic warfare campaign that has been planned, gamed out, and rehearsed. Iran is not reacting. Iran is executing. The financial markets have processed all of this at the speed of algorithmic trading, and the numbers are staggering. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped over 900 points in a single session, one of the largest single-day point drops this year. The Nasdaq fell nearly 2%. European indices were worse. The DAX in Germany fell over 3%, and the FTSE 100 in London shed nearly 2.5%. Emerging market currencies across Asia and Africa weakened sharply against the dollar as capital fled to perceived safe havens. Gold hit an all-time high. And cryptocurrency markets, which often behave as a real-time fear gauge, swung violently in both directions within hours as traders tried to price in what nobody can fully price in: genuine uncertainty about whether the global energy supply chain will be functioning normally 2 weeks from now. Here is what makes this moment genuinely unprecedented, and why every single person watching this video, regardless of where you live, should be paying close attention. For the first time in modern history, all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council member states have been targeted in a coordinated military campaign within a single 24-hour window. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, every single one. This was not accidental overlap. This was an explicit message from Tehran that there is no corner of the Gulf that is safe from Iranian reach, that the protection the United States has offered these nations for decades is no longer a credible deterrent, and that any Gulf state that hosts American military forces, shares intelligence with Israel, or participates in economic pressure on Iran will be treated as a combatant. The political implications inside these countries are enormous. The Gulf monarchies have spent decades performing a very delicate balancing act, maintaining close security partnerships with the United States, while simultaneously keeping economic and diplomatic backchannels to Tehran open. That balance is now completely broken. These governments are facing, in real time, the choice their worst-case strategic planning scenarios always warned them about. Do you stand fully with Washington and risk becoming a permanent target of Iranian retaliation? Or do you begin quietly signaling to Tehran that you want to find an exit ramp and in doing so, potentially fracture the entire American security architecture in the region, the UAE's response has been the most watched. Abu Dhabi has not issued a direct condemnation of Iran by name in any official statement since the attacks began. Read that sentence again. A country whose territory and airspace have been violated, whose civilian infrastructure has sustained damage, has not said Iran's name out loud. That is not an oversight. That is a diplomatic choice of enormous strategic weight. The UAE has billions of dollars in Iranian-linked trade flowing through its ports and free zones. It has a shared maritime border, and it has a population that includes a significant Iranian diaspora. Abu Dhabi is telling Washington, quietly but unmistakably, do not assume we will follow you all the way down this road. And that is exactly the signal that Tehran wants the entire world to see. Now we arrive at the moment I promised you at the beginning of this video. And I want you to understand why this is not hyperbole, and why the people in the rooms where these decisions are being made are more worried right now than any public statement will ever reflect. The architecture of American military dominance in the Middle East was built on two foundational assumptions. First, that U.S. air superiority would remain unchallenged. The shooting down of two F-15s, regardless of the tactical details, has publicly shattered that assumption in the minds of every regional actor watching. Second, the Gulf partner nations would remain cohesive and aligned with American strategic objectives under pressure. Kuwait's intelligence failure, or worse, Kuwait's calculated silence, has cracked that foundation in a way that will take years to repair, if it can be repaired at all. What comes next is not predetermined. That is both the terrifying reality and the only source of genuine hope in this situation. The United States still has enormous military capacity in the region. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group remains operational in the eastern Mediterranean. B-52 strategic bombers are positioned at Diego Garcia. American diplomats are working every back channel available to find an off-ramp that allows Iran to claim some form of victory without triggering a full military escalation that nobody, not Washington, not Tehran, and certainly not the Gulf monarchies, actually wants to manage through to its conclusion. But here is the razor's edge that all of these actors are walking right now. Every day that the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed is a day that global oil markets price in a higher probability of full-scale conflict. Every day that oil prices rise is a day that governments in Europe and Asia face more domestic political pressure to demand American de-escalation. Every day that American aircraft carriers sit in the Mediterranean without a decisive response is a day that Iran's calculation, that Washington does not have the political will to escalate, gets reinforced. And every day that gets reinforced is a day that the next provocation becomes more likely, not less. The world has been in places like this before. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the 1973 oil embargo, the Gulf War. Each time, the catastrophe that seemed inevitable was navigated, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes narrowly, always at enormous cost. The question being asked in every capital on earth right now, in Washington and Tel Aviv, in Tehran, in Riyadh, in Beijing, and in Moscow, is whether the people currently holding the steering wheels in this crisis are capable of the same navigation. Kuwait's fatal mistake did not start this war, but it may have removed the last clean exit. The F-15s that were shot down over the Gulf were not just aircraft. They were a signal, sent by Iran to every American ally in the region and to every market on Earth, that the old rules no longer apply, that the geography of this conflict has expanded, and that the cost of staying close to Washington is no longer theoretical. The Gulf is no longer a buffer zone. It is a battlefield, and the world's most critical energy corridor is caught directly in the middle. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening, and what is actually at stake, then share it right now with someone who needs to understand this. The mainstream coverage is giving you fragments. You just got the full picture. We will keep tracking every development as this situation evolves. And believe me, it is moving fast. Do not miss what comes next.